So I would just like to welcome you to this ZeroPM webinar today called Do You Use PFAS in Your Business? The PFAS Guide will help you find out. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Hale. I work for the German Water Centre and also Arcadis, and it is my great pleasure today to introduce the webinar. For those of you who don't know ZeroPM, it's a Horizon 2020 research project where we're looking at interlinking prevention, prioritisation and removal strategies for persistent and mobile substances within the environment. Today we are hearing from two speakers. They're both members of ZeroPM. They're both great. First we're hearing in a different order, but first I'll introduce Anna to you. She's a senior toxicologist. She has a PhD in ecotoxicology, so right outside my expertise. And at Chemsec, she's the project manager of the SList and the marketplace, and she's definitely the expert and person to ask about substitution of hazardous chemicals. Then we're also going to be hearing from Jonatan. He also works at Chemsec. He is a senior chemicals and business advisor, and he's got a PhD in organic chemistry, much more what I understand. Jonatan leads lots of different PFAS initiatives at Chemsec, and he's the project manager for the Chemsec business group. So in today's webinar, we're going to hear about the PFAS Guide. So this is a tool that was actually developed in ZeroPM by Chemsec. And Anna and Jonatan are going to walk you through how to use it. Basically, it helps businesses identify if and where they have PFAS in their products and processes. So it's a really helpful tool. What I will say to everybody is if you have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A function, write them down, and then at the end of the presentations, what we will do is Hans-Peter, who's going to be watching the Q&A, will ask Anna and Jonatan these questions, and we'll try and go through as many as possible. Any that we don't get to, we'll do them basically afterwards, after the webinar. So I'm thinking that Jonatan can share his screen and then we can start the presentation. This will be recorded. So if you miss anything or if you want your colleagues to watch it, then they can watch it afterwards. So with that, I hand over the floor. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction, Sarah, and thank you, ZeroPM, for the opportunity to share our work. So today we will talk about the PFAS Guide, but I will start with just Sarah introduced ZeroPM, but I just want to share our part and the PFAS Guide part in that project. So we are part of working package 4, and there are a few different tasks within that. And task 4.2 is the one concerning the PFAS Guide, which we'll talk about today. But we also have other tasks within that project. We're going to add PM substances to the SList, and we're also highlighting new PM substance alternatives that will be available on Chemsec marketplace. So just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today and what you're going to hear about. So we'll just be very brief on Chemsec and who we are and what we do, and also very, very brief on PFAS. And then we will focus on what is it actually that the market need in order to do the transition away from PFAS, where PFAS Guide then obviously is one large part of that work, at least from us. And we will also talk a bit more about how the PFAS Guide then is connected to our other tools, the SList and marketplace, in order to facilitate a substitution away from PFAS substances. So with that, I will start with the Chemsec part, very brief on that. So we're a Swedish environmental NGO, and our work aims at reducing the use of hazardous substances. And our sort of means to reach that is that we are cooperating with different stakeholders to drive that change towards safer chemicals. And our funding to do all of this work is from the Swedish government and from a range of different charity funds, but also research funds and Horizon 2020 research like ZeroPM, for example. And then what we do. So we are driving the political discussion on hazardous chemicals. We're part of the scientific committees of ECHA. We are communicating with the Commission and the Parliament and the Council regarding chemicals. We have great connections with the member states. So we're a voice to try to drive the policy discussion on chemicals. But what we want to bring when we talk to policymakers is that we want to bring positive examples from the business world, showing companies that are doing great things, that are progressive, that have phased out hazardous chemicals, because we know that this is a very powerful message for policymakers. And of course, in order to understand these positive examples, we want to challenge companies to improve their chemicals management, and we do that both by a range of different tools, like we will talk about today, but also in discussions and dialogues with companies. And the online tools that we have is a support for companies in order to switch to safer chemicals. And in addition to this, we also have a work around investors where we try to inform them about the risks and opportunities in the chemical industry. And I will touch upon this subject in the end of this talk, so you can understand how we do that as well. And finally, about Chemsec, I just want to mention the Chemsec Business Group, which is a group of companies that we are talking to and discussing chemicals management and how to afford chemical legislation that is progressive and is supporting frontrunners within chemicals management. But enough of Chemsec talk, and then try to focus on the things that we're actually trying to talk about today. So just very briefly on PFAS, I assume that most of you are very familiar with the concept of PFAS and what that entails, but I just want to mention a few things here. So PFAS and what is the reason for concern for this substances or this family of substances. So PFAS is widespread. There is an extreme widespread use of PFAS in so many different functions and uses, which we will see about later when Anna talk about the PFAS guide. All PFAS substances are persistent, and this is a common property for them all. And being persistent means that they don't degrade in nature. And that means that over time, we will have increased levels of different PFAS substances in nature, in our bloods, in the water. And of course, this leads then to contamination of water, soil, blood. The Forever Pollution Project, which I've borrowed the map from on this picture, identified 17,000 sites where they have contamination of PFAS in Europe. And the Human Biomonitoring project within EU measured the PFAS concentrations in blood, and I think that they tested teenagers from 12 different countries, and all except one, the average was higher than the EFSA safe level concentration. So there is a really big concern about these chemicals and how prevalent they are in nature and in our bodies. But of course, there is an industry producing these chemicals, selling these chemicals, and what I want to point out here is that even though there is a revenue for these companies and a profit for these companies, we have made a work to understand that, and we have estimated the PFAS production revenue to around 26 billion euros per year, and the profit for those companies around 4 billion euros annually. Which is, I would say, a fairly small business on a global scale and on a chemical scale. But comparing that to the huge cost for society from soil remediation, water remediation, health effects on humans, for biomonitoring and other things that society has to tackle, which we estimated to 16 trillion euros, we can see that there is a very unbalanced scale of what actually these chemicals sort of add to society compared to what they are costing society. So what then is necessary in order for the market? We know that a transition of the market is a key to solve this PFAS crisis. We need market and businesses to understand that they need to move away from these chemicals. And as I've mentioned here, the science around this is actually clear. I would say that the scientific community speaks with one voice regarding PFAS. That the use and the production of PFAS must be limited in order to solve this crisis. And we all, I think, most of us agree that regulation is the most efficient measure in order to reduce the use. But we also need to balance this and understand that the market can also transition without regulation or in the before regulation comes into force, and the changes within that market can be very fast, and we can talk about global changes, we need also to understand that the market is dependent on regulation, but the regulation and the regulatory processes also rely on the market maturity of what kind of alternatives are available, what kind of different solutions can we have in order to reach a PFAS-free economy. So both of these two different ways of dealing with the PFAS actually are very related and very interconnected. And one example of this is, of course, that within the PFAS restriction, which is proposed right now and under scrutiny from ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency, the derogations from a restriction, meaning that what are exempted from being banned, are based on the availability of alternatives. So what is on the market dictates what are regulated. So what we need from the market to do this transition? We need an awareness among companies. We need companies and people within these companies and organizations to understand what is the problem, which I've already talked about here. And they also need to understand where and why is PFAS used? What is the function of PFAS, and where do we use it, and where can they find it? And of course, there is also a knowledge that is necessary. We need to understand how we can do functional substitution of PFAS, meaning that we need to replace the function that PFAS provides to a certain product with something else. That may be another chemical or another material or another type of solution. And we also need to understand what is the availability of alternatives for the different uses, not only for PFAS as a whole, because they have so many different functions, so there are no sort of general solutions. We need to understand for the different uses of PFAS, what kind of alternatives are available. And we also need regulation to sort of follow. As of now, we have a proposal of a PFAS restriction, meaning that a lot of companies are actually preparing for this, doing the R&D, phasing out these chemicals. And we need, in order to sort of make sure that these front-runner companies that are taking action, that already have a plan for how to move away from PFAS, that the regulation then follows that, and that these companies then can sort of get the business opportunity from that regulation. At the Chemsec, we have a range of different initiatives on PFAS. For example, webinars like this one, and our news. We write a lot about what's happening with PFAS and other PFAS-related articles. We have the PFAS Guide and SList and Marketplace, which Anna will talk about today. But we also have Pasas Movement and Chemcore and our investors initiative, which we will mention very briefly. So we have a lot of different initiatives ongoing regarding PFAS. And we have a set of tools. We have the PFAS Guide and the SList and Marketplace, and Anna will be introducing this trio of tools for you today and talk about how they can help companies and organizations to transition away from PFAS. So I will hand it over to you, Anna. And
thank you very much. Yes, this webinar is to be about the PFAS Guide, and that will be the sort of a bit of a main focus. It's also a delivery for the ZeroPM project and the first one we finalized. But we see that these three tools are very much interlinked. If you're working in a company and you are transitioning away from PFAS, they are all providing one piece of the puzzle which is needed for the market transition. So therefore I will also talk briefly about the other two, but we can take the next slide. So the reason why we came up with the idea for the PFAS Guide is much rooted in the discussions that we've had, for example, in the Chemsec business group, but also with other companies. And the last few years, as in the scientific community, it has also been an increasing awareness among companies about PFAS. There has been increasing questions for consumers, and now lately also more and more regulatory initiatives. So companies have understood that they need to keep track of their PFAS and to understand if this will affect them in any way, the regulations that are coming or the questions from consumers. And what we understood a few years ago was that even for the companies that have quite a lot of people working on chemicals that have a good way to work with chemicals management, it is challenging to understand actually why, where, and if you have PFAS in your processes and products. There has been an awareness since a long time that, for example, outdoor clothing is an issue where there may be PFAS for durable water repellents. You may know that for kitchen utensils like non-stick frying pans, there could probably be PFAS. But in most other applications, that has been more on an ad hoc basis that you have sort of found out like, hey, there could be PFAS in coatings and in lubricants and in a lot of other things. And there has been lacking a sort of systematic way to understand as a downstream user if you have PFAS, basically. So that is the gap that we wanted to fill with a PFAS guide. So we can take the next one. And so this is a project that we worked with mainly during, I would say, all of 2022. And we launched this in February this year, the PFAS guide. And as I said, the aim is to support companies to understand where and why PFAS is used in their organization and how this is of importance to them. So it's really about the first step in PFAS phase out, just knowing if you have PFAS and where and why. So when we produced this guide, we talked a lot with companies, sort of what they would need and how they would like the information to be presented. We had seen a lot of different scientific publications, reports, and so forth out there in the world, but they were not really adapted from a company perspective. And so this is what we have tried to do with the PFAS guide. It comes very much from a product use function perspective, and it talks about PFAS much like a group, so PFAS in general. So it helps with the first step that we call mapping of PFAS, like where is it in your business? And so we can take the next one. So the user we imagine for the PFAS guide, I mean, it can of course also be relevant for scientists and policymakers, of course, the information in there, but it's really tailored to be used by someone that works in some type of company and that has sort of gotten on their table or on their plate that you have to look into the PFAS issue. And that can be a lot of different people working with, say, sustainability in different ways, with chemicals management, with regulatory affairs. It could be companies that are relatively large, that has a sustainability department and that has a person responsible for chemicals management. But we know there are also many small businesses, startups, private small companies where there's sort of one person doing everything. And we wanted the PFAS guide to sort of be useful for all these different levels of expertise, so that you could come in and sort of see with the information available and click through the level that could be helpful for you. So that should be something for everyone in there. So we can take the next one. Yes. So the PFAS guide is basically two parts. One is a database part, which I will go through soon. And one is the more just information parts where we have different texts, basically. And the aim is very much to also help this understanding of where might there be PFAS in my business. So the first section called Investigates speaks about why PFAS is typically used, what type of function it has. It has a lot of function. It's used for flame retardants, for non-stick, for lubrication, for electronic, to prevent from high voltages. It has a lot of different uses. So by understanding all of those, you can also get a better idea if this is something that applies to you. So we called it like PFAS red flags, what to look out for and where to sort of be a bit cautious and suspicious that there might be PFAS. And part of that investigate part also includes supply chain communication, because you need to get this information from somewhere, typically from your supplier. And this is also an issue that we know by experience is very challenging for many companies. To ask questions about the chemical content of the things you buy and to rely on the answer, especially when it's chemicals that are not yet regulated. So for PFAS, it's basically only PFOA and PFOS that has been regulated so far. So if you're asking for further information than that, you have to be able to explain why you want this and why it's important and what kind of information. So we also have like a supply chain questionnaire that you can use and send to your supplier that explains this different things, and also how you would like the response back to be, like what kind of information is really what you're looking for. So that is also part there. We also have a short section about chemical testing, which is sort of the final resort when you're investigating if you have PFAS in your stuff. You have to rely on supply chain communication, but sometimes you also have to follow up with chemical testing to verify that it's true that you have or don't have PFAS in these products. So there's also something about different tests and reliability and challenges and opportunities with that there as well. And then we have a section about phase outs. This is something which is not the focus of the PFAS guide, but rather on marketplace, which I will mention later. But it still goes through some of the steps that are necessary to consider when you are then moving away from having found out that you have PFAS, how to move on with really replacing it. So we link to and discuss a little bit, especially around alternatives assessment. Of course, if you are to replace something that is hazardous, you have to also ensure that what you replace it to is not problematic. So this is alternatives assessment. And then we just have this basic session called concern, which describes why PFAS is a problem in general and why you should care as a company and why this is important. And this information is also written so that you could be, if you're working in a company, you might need this kind of information also to convince your colleagues that this is an important issue and we need to work on this because of this and this and this. So it also tries to provide the arguments needed to work on this. Then we have a very brief session on regulation. Much is happening when it comes to regulation of PFAS globally. Very much is happening in the EU, what was mentioned with this universal restriction proposal, but there is also a lot of things happening in the US. We described that very briefly because there it's happening many different things in many different member states, and they are not always about regulation. They can be also about transparency, so having reporting obligations to report that you have PFAS in your products. This is also where the guide can be useful. But at least you get a brief overview, and you can get some links on where to find more information about regulations in the parts of the world that are of your interest, so to say. And then we also have like a library, one can say, or what we call sector here. And here is where we have gathered all the reports that we have found that looks into PFAS uses in different sectors and different types of products. And there are quite many of those by now, so we thought it would be nice to put them in one place so that you can find them all and read more about your specific sector there. We can go to the next slide. So the PFAS guide also holds a database that consists of PFAS uses, materials, and functions. And the idea is that you should be able to use these curtains, I think you call them. You can scroll down and you can find different products and functions and see if your business or your type of products or materials is likely to have PFAS. And then you can read a little bit more about that. And if we have information about alternatives, for example, on Marketplace, or we have found possible alternatives listed somewhere, we have just mentioned them. We have not, for all of these, done an alternatives assessment, but it's just the basic information that we have found information on alternatives, and those have been used somewhere. And this is a database where we have included all kinds of sources of information that have looked into uses of PFAS. And so we have some scientific publications, partly made by scientists within the ZeroPM project, that also holds these huge databases of uses of PFAS. Also, the reports that we mentioned that we have on the sector session holds information on uses about PFAS. We have also received information from companies that have done mapping exercises and have done their own like Excel sheets of where they have found PFAS. We have included that. And we also would very much like to see this database growing. So if you are using PFAS or you know about the PFAS use and you find something which is not in the database, you're very welcome to provide that information to us so that we can extend this. And we have also we are building this continuously with, for example, information from the restriction dossier, which holds a lot of information also about PFAS uses. So this should really be a growing resource. And yeah, as it's set up now, you cannot really know where the information is coming from, and it's not the important part, but it's just gives a first indication about PFAS uses. But yeah, became a goal. So one thing we found out, or sort of got obvious to us when doing the work with the PFAS guide, was that for electronics and PFAS in electronics, we could not really find a good sector report. And this is also a field where PFAS was discussed a lot, and where it was also said that PFAS would be especially difficult to replace in some cases. We also understood that PFAS, or the electronic sector, is a big user of PFAS. And it's also a sector that feeds into a lot of other sectors. So very many different types of industries have electronics in part of their products or as part of their products. So we decided that this is an important field where information is lacking, and therefore we wanted to look closer into that. So we can take the next one. So we decided that we needed to do a report specifically on PFAS use in the electronics sector. And here we commissioned the consultancy WSP. So we had some really good experts there looking into this for us. And the task they were given was to do an overview of uses and functions of PFAS within the electronics sector, and that this should result in a sort of hands-on guidance for people that really work within the industry, to help with the mapping of PFAS in the same way as with the guide, to help them understand if, why, and where they have PFAS. And so it's aiming to really be also an easy, accessible guidance for people working within the industry. And again, we also have put the information, where there is information on alternatives, we have put that in the report. So there's a first sort of indication that you would then need to evaluate further, but at least you get the knowledge that for some of these uses, there are alternatives that have been used. So we can take the next one. So this report we published a few months after the main PFAS guide. It's called Check Your Tech. And it holds information on PFAS use in the electronic sectors. There were 77 uses of PFAS identified, and the report is structured in 3 different use areas, one could say. So it goes through electronic devices, then it looks specifically to the manufacturing of electronics, and then there is a specific part on semiconductors, which has been a place where, or a use that is especially often mentioned as an area where PFAS is difficult to replace. And we launched this as a webinar in, I think, May, I already forgot, or April. And there we had also the authors from WSP speaking about how they did the work. And we also had HP as a company who has been following the process of the guide and who was really eager to start using it. So they are using it already in their supply chain, and to help also their suppliers get a better understanding of PFAS in the industry, so that that information could flow more easily in the company. So the report consists of a report in PDF format, but there is also an Excel sheet to that listing the uses, and that was what especially HP were particularly keen on using, and that would facilitate their work. And the information behind the guide is done both through desktop research by these experts at WSP, but they have also performed interviews with many representatives from the electronics industry. And so there is a mix of that. And what we have also learned during this process, the work with the report took more or less 1 year, spread out over 1 year, but through this year, and also since we published the report, there are a lot of things happening when it comes to replacing PFAS in the electronics industry. So there we see that much is happening, and there has already been some additional alternatives developed since the guide was published. And we keep, of course, track of that, and we also put that information when we have it into the database of the PFAS guide to keep that up to date. So I also wanted to mention the SList, which is also one sort of part of the replacing PFAS, one could say. So the SList is an old project of ours that we've had since 2008, and it was formed very much in parallel with REACH, and the concept in REACH of having a candidate list of substances of very high concern that will later be regulated. And the SList is really our version of the REACH candidate list. So we have used the criteria for substances of very high concern to identify chemicals upfront that will be regulated. And we have a database with chemicals, and that is now over 1,000 substances that we see fulfill the SVHC criteria. And it's used by, it was set up especially for companies, for them to be able to stay ahead of regulation and be prepared for upcoming regulation. But it's also used by policymakers, financial investors lately, and NGOs, for examples. And it has quite a large user base that is also very global. And we have updated the SList a number of times in order to predict and to stay ahead of the regulatory developments, and based on the discussions that we understand and where the development is going. So we've had a number of updates with EDCs, with PBTs, with PMTs in 2019, which is where we got to know all these great people in the ZeroPM project. And we also did a specific PFAS update early this year, in early February. So we can take the next one. I think there was, and this is something we discussed for a long time, because it has been obvious to us and to most people in the scientific community, as was said, that PFAS is really a concern as a group. And the SList is based very much on individual substances, and we have understood that this group of PFAS chemicals is huge, and there are different numbers. There has been an old figure by, not very old, but since 2017, of about 5,000 substances that has been used a lot. The PFAS restriction mentions a number of 10,000 substances, but it doesn't really list them anywhere. We have a project within the ZeroPM program that with PubChem that lists more than 6 million. I think now it's more than 9 million substances. So the question is really, as a company, sort of where to begin and how would you know what to look for? So we try to, with the SList, we really want to say that we find all PFAS problematic and to be phased out, but we wanted to provide a sort of subset of PFASs that are most likely to be used. So therefore we selected PFAS chemicals, so chemicals fulfilling the OECD definition of being PFAS, that has also been registered to be used and produced, to be produced or imported to the European Union or to the USA. And that subset was not so big as the other ones. So we added 317 new PFAS substances to the SList. We had a few since earlier. So still saying that all PFAS are problematic, but trying to provide a relevant list of substances that you can specifically ask for or expect to find in your processes and products. We can take the next one. So sort of the final step then in PFAS substitution is, of course, when you have identified your PFAS, where you have it, why, you need to find alternatives. And the marketplace is also a project we've had since before, since 2017. This was also the results of talking to companies. We have a lot of companies that we are talking to, and they all have a long list of substances that they would like to replace if possible. And they asked, isn't there just one place where you can see like all alternatives that are available, and we can just pick what is possible to do instead of having to go substance by substance to your supplier and ask for a replacement. So this is really what we have tried to do with the marketplace, is to do this sort of window shopping or a buffet of available alternatives so that they can be visible. So this is really a business-to-business websites where companies are welcome to advertise their safer alternatives free of charge, and other companies can go in and see what's available. And also, if you're a company looking for a specific alternative, you can publish a request on that. And we would like to emphasize also that we see substitution and alternatives as something that can be very broad. It's rarely possible to find a specific drop-in chemical that works exactly as the one you're replacing, but you often have to look a bit broader. So therefore, an alternative is not always another chemical. It can also be a technological solution or a different process or to use a different material. So all kinds of alternatives or solutions that can be used to replace a harmful substance are welcome on the Chemsec marketplace. We can take the next one. So as I said, this is really a place where people interested in finding alternatives and people producing alternatives can find each other and make a first contact. So you see the advertise and you can figure out if this is of interest, and then these companies can start a discussion. The actual substitution or the actual buying of a chemical is happening outside a marketplace and outside of what we are involved with. So it's really just this dating site, we call it sometimes, where first connection can be made, and then all the other things happens outside of sort of our platform. We can take the next one. So we also have criteria, of course, for the alternatives published on marketplace, that those should be safer, and this means that they should not hold the same properties as substances on the SList, or not have any SVHC properties or similar to be published. We can take the next. So what we did early this summer was also that we, in light of all the things that are happening with PFAS, we chose to have a specific entrance to the marketplace only for PFAS alternatives, because there we see a high interest and a lot of things happening. And we have now about 100 alternatives on marketplace to PFAS, and the number is growing. And we see specifically 3 areas where we have a lot of alternatives. So that is durable water repellents for textiles, firefighting foams, and different types of food contact materials. And then we have a few more, but those are more scattered. There are no other such big groups as these ones. So we are really interested in hearing from anyone knowing about alternatives to PFAS to give us that information. So just a shout out that just let us know if you hear about a company or if you hear about a solution. We'd be happy to follow that up. We can take the next. Yes, so this was basically just to recap what I talked about, the 3 different tools we have to facilitate PFAS phase out. So PFAS Guide, SList, and the marketplace. And now I have talked a lot and I want to hand over to Jonatan.
Thank you very much, Anna. I will try to just wrap up the last things that we wanted to share. So PFAS is a very important issue, I think, and there is also not only the sort of companies and alternative providers and regulators talking about PFAS. We also want to show that there are other stakeholders interested in PFAS. So Chemscore is our tool where we rank different chemical producers according to their production of hazardous chemicals. But in combination with that, we also have something called the IIHC, the Investor Initiative on Hazardous Chemicals, where we have gathered more than 50 different investors with more than $11 trillion assets under management or similar, to discuss chemicals and how they can sort of talk to chemical producers and the other companies that they are investing in what they produce and how we can reduce the use of hazardous chemicals. And what it all comes down to is that these investors have 3 asks to the companies that they invest in. That first one is to increase transparency. We need more data on what they are producing and what is the sort of properties of those chemicals they are producing. Number 2, which is of course important for PFAS, is that the investors want the companies to phase out persistent chemicals because they see there is a liability risk with producing these companies. For example, in the US, there has been a lot of liabilities regarding PFAS production. And the investors also want the companies to improve their company's Chemscore. But PFAS is really something that also investors see as a very potent risk or financial risk for companies to engage in or to produce. So I think this is important to point out that this stakeholder group is also has also identified that there's a big risk with PFAS and that we need to do something about these chemicals. And company-wise, we have the PFAS movement, which is a gathering of over 100 companies that are all agreeing that PFAS is a major health and environmental problem, and they all support a ban and a group ban on all non-essential PFAS uses. And all of these companies also have the ambition to phase out all non-essential PFAS uses. So it's a way of showing that there is a lot of momentum within the different businesses and different companies to actually do something about the PFAS issue, and they want a stricter regulation on PFAS. And I think it's now 109 different companies actually part of the PFAS movement. And with that, I would like to thank you all for listening, and I think that both me and Anna would be happy to answer any potential questions in the Q&A. So I will hand over to Hans-Peter, I guess.
Yes, hello. Yeah, thank you very much, Jonathan and Anna. Very impressive to see all the great work that you're doing at Chemsec to address hazardous substances and PFAS, and these three great tools, the PFAS Guide, SList, and Marketplace. And the Q&A is now open. Currently, we have 5 questions, and we will go through those. But if anybody has any question that you would want to ask live to Jonathan or Anna, please do so. And I see the first question is from one of our PhD students in ZeroPM. And I think also this question was answered in the presentation, but maybe it's good to get clarity on these things. So Rahul asked, I was going through some resources and had a question about Chemsec's perspective on safety. How does Chemsec define the safety of a chemical? Is the definition of safety relative in comparison to other chemicals, or is it absolute?
Yes, I had a slide. I think it's in part it can be a philosophical question. It is depending on what you mean and where and why. But when we talk about the Chemsec marketplace, we call this safer alternatives because I think it's really difficult to say that something is absolutely safe in the end. We want it to be, to the best of our knowledge, safe. And then we have criteria about the properties it should not have. But we also, by that, want to be humble in acknowledging that we learn a lot of things over time, and that some alternatives we consider safe today, at the best of our knowledge, could turn out in a few years that there is some property we did not know about. And so I think it's important for us and for everyone to working in substitution to sort of have that in mind, that this is something, this change or this transition will need to go on for a long time. Unfortunately, I don't think we can say that we can be bulletproof, sure that we have an alternative that will be safe forever. We will probably learn more, but we have to, of course, to the best of our knowledge and the resources we have, to do our best to assure safety before moving on to something else.
Yes, thanks. And just to jump in on that discussion, I remember one of the first conversations we had when I learned about the SList, as I asked, why isn't there a saint list? And it was exactly for that reason. We can say that chemicals are safer, but how do you ever truly know that it's safe? But you can't know that it's safer than what's currently hazardous. Thanks.
Yeah, we also get the question about having also positive lists, which the marketplace a little bit is, but if you should have sort of an absolute positive lists for all uses, I think that would be very difficult. So those positive lists are often based like on a specific user function. So you can have a positive list for flame retardants, or you can have a positive list of textile dyes, but have like a positive list for everything would be very, very difficult, I think.
I totally agree. Next question, it's also from Rahul. I think we got time to get through them all. So this is to Jonathan. In one of the slides, PFAS was mentioned as persistent, accumulating over time, and thus considered a chemical of concern. Does Chemsec believe that persistence alone can categorize a chemical as a concern, irrespective of its mobility and toxicity, and I guess bioaccumulation?
I think that Anna can maybe support me in this question if she wants to fill in, but I can start. I think that, I mean, from Chemsec point of view, I think that we believe that persistency is a property of concern. As I said in my presentation part, that I mean, the problem we have with persistency is that we will have increasing concentrations over time, meaning that at some point we will reach levels which will affect humans or nature in some way. So therefore, persistency is a problem in itself, even though in many cases it's connected to mobility or bioaccumulativity or toxicity. But I think we should be very careful with adding persistent chemicals to the nature, because that they are an inherent problem. So I think from Chemsec's point of view, I would say that persistency is a problem. And I also think that there is scientific evidence now that we really support this standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anything you want to add to that, Anna?
No, I can just add that, of course, there are different levels of persistency, and there can be a discussion. In the case of PFAS, it's obvious that they are super, super persistent. So they are well above the sort of VP criteria in REACH. And then sort of where to put the bar, where persistency is severe enough as a property of its own, that is another discussion. But I think this is definitely the way forward when it comes to PFAS and those very persistent chemicals, that is enough concerning.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I mean often in this the planetary boundary of novel entities is used because it's these persistent chemicals that can accumulate as mixtures to potentially reach planetary thresholds. And the next question is from Nikola Krolovic. Is there information on specific PFAS, such as which is used where?
I assume this is about the guide.
I think so. Like, for instance, I think what he's asking, I'm interested in PFAS. Can I click on PFAS and find out all the places in the PFAS guide where PFAS is used?
You want
I can try. Since the guide is sort of aimed at from a company perspective, the focus we have chosen is to look at the functions and uses of PFAS. So there is no way to sort of today to click PFAS, for example, and see where is it used. What you can do is, of course, you can the whole database is available as an Excel sheet, and the CAS numbers where we have identified the specific CAS number to a specific use. Of course, then you can use the Excel sheet and find you can filter for PFAS CAS number, and then you can see where it's used. So you can do that, but it's not possible to do today at the sort of the web version. And the reason for that is that we want to focus on function and uses, and that's where, if you're a company, that's where you need to start to understand what functions do I have and where can those be sort of a source for PFAS.
And I think also that makes sense from the company point of view, because the PFAS formulations have been rapidly changing in recent years. So it's really hard to keep track of each chemical, I find. Great. Okay, the next question is from Rahul again to Anna Lennquist. If a company possesses several chemicals but is uncertain whether any of them are PFAS, can the guide assist them in identifying them as PFAS or not?
Good question. I mean, we have like things in the supply chain questionnaire, we describe the OECD definition. I'm not sure all companies would be able to look at a molecular structure and say if that is PFAS. So I think you would need to go another way around to understand that. Do you have a better answer? I mean, you can go to the SList, but it might not be one of those 417.
I maybe can add that. I mean, I think this is a major issue for many companies when they are trying to understand their sort of PFAS impact, or the impact that PFAS has on their business, because it is very difficult for them to ask. Many of them don't have sort of the chemical knowledge for identifying the CF2 or CF3 group and the substance and the structure. So what they do is that they ask their suppliers, and the suppliers might not agree on what is a PFAS to them. Some of them think that fluoropolymers are not PFAS. Some of them think that F gases are not PFAS. And it's what I think we say in the in the guide is that there are different ways of defining what is PFAS. We have the OECD definition, and there is now an EPA definition. So the easiest way is to use one of them. I would recommend to use the OECD definition, which is used in the PFAS restriction, which is very sort of broad, and that makes it a bit easier. But this is, of course, a problem because it's difficult for someone without the sort of chemical knowledge to really understand what does it mean with a PFAS. So it is I think it's a challenge for companies, and I think it's a good point, and maybe something we can sort of clarify a bit more within the guide as well, that specific question.
Mm-hmm. No, and I would just say, like, from a scientific point of view, if you have a company you're suspecting that you have PFAS in one of your products and you want to make sure your supplier didn't tell you, you can always kind of reach out to the local scientists in the area who are working with PFAS, and maybe they can give you some guidance, such as how to do testing locally. Of course, this would be something that usually you'd have to pay for, but you could get guidance by contacting the local university experts if there's a PFAS specialist there. Very good. So the next question, this is from Baba Berent Frida. There's a question about the definition. Where can the definition be found? PFAS in wastewater, PFAS is a chemical in a product. Do only dissolved PFAS fall under the substitution? I think contrasting that to maybe fluoropolymers. What about chemicals bounded to membranes, such as in fuel cells? So what definition of PFAS are you using?
So we've been using the OECD definition of PFAS, and I think it is, in my opinion, sort of the best way and the easiest way to define what is a PFAS, and that includes fluoropolymers, and in most cases also F-gases. Regarding the chemicals bonded to membranes, I would say that in fuel cells, what's used in fuel cells is, for example, Nafion, which is not in all cases bonded to membranes. I would say that also the uses in PFAS or many uses are essentially sort of the PFAS substances. They are not bonded. So I would say if it has a PFAS moiety, fall under the OECD definition, we think it's a PFAS, and you should consider how to sort of replace that and find different alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so the next question is from Ralph Ebbinghaus. Excellent set of tools, he says. Congrats. So he's
good
asking,
question.
but he has a follow-up. And this, I guess it's about your contact with businesses and investors. And he noticed, with a sharp eye, haven't seen Chinese companies on your list. How would you evaluate the perception of the PFAS issue in China? And I guess some background in there is China is one of the largest producers of PFAS.
Yes, I can start. You can help out on. So yes, I mean, chemical production as a whole is very much concentrated to China. It's more than half of the production globally, even more than that now, I think. And of course, that's also a PFAS issue. I mean, a lot of PFAS is being produced in China. We have issues regarding transparency. I mean, it's very hard for us to understand what is produced, who is producing it. That is also difficult, I would say, in EU and US. But there at least we have some idea of who is producing what, even though we still lack a lot of data. In China, much more difficult for us to understand that. So it's difficult to sort of pinpoint the producers of different kinds of PFAS. And I think, I mean, from the Chemsec point of view, this lack of transparency is, of course, problematic. I know that there has been some additions of different PFAS chemicals to watch lists and things in China. So I think there is also a growing awareness about this. But it's more difficult to understand exactly what is happening, what is produced in China. And this is a problem that we have, really have, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about the list of companies. So we have the Chemsec Business Group. We have the companies that signed up for the PFAS movement. And then we also have the companies that we have, the chemical producing companies evaluated in Chemscore. And I think as Jonatan said, it has been difficult to work with China in terms of transparency and so forth. But the companies that we work with that are downstream users, they often have production in China. So they have to figure out, and they are going on audits, and they are talking to the suppliers We have not done that super much, but we are sort of trying to also assist them in placing these demands. And we see also when we look at, for example, users of the SList, that there are a lot of people coming from China, and those are probably then suppliers to companies that we are more in contact with and reaching in that way.
Great, thank you. And I think, okay, this question, I think it's an interesting question because I get this a lot. It's like what to do with all the PFAS items in your house, I think is where it's coming from. So what should we do with old PFAS containing stuff, for example, old cloths or furniture, or that really cool hiking jacket, or that nice Teflon pan that's still not stick? I mean, what's your recommendation for those items? This is not the Chemsec guide. I mean, this is...
No, I think that's it. It's as you say, it's a great question. I think there is no sort of magical or pathway for all of that. I think it's difficult. I think we know that there is problems with incineration of PFAS. We don't know what's happening when we throw away our stuff. It's leaching from landfills, etc. So this is definitely a problem. I think in the sort of holistic view, it is a problem when we're talking about recycling, and we want to move to a circular economy. We want to be able to recycle our material, and PFAS is a very large barrier to reach that. So I think that's, I mean, from our point of view, that's it's a problematic. And then when it comes to what to do with specific stuff, I would say that it definitely depends on where you are and what possibilities you have to sort of put them in different kind of ways. I'm not certain myself what to do with my old stuff, which probably contains PFAS. So I don't think I have a good answer to that one.
I could just say, like, my own personal answer is when I get asked this is I'm also against unnecessary waste. So unless it's like a product that's say like a product for babies or children or things like that, maybe you could consider if that's safe to expose the baby or the children or the pregnant mother to this product. But otherwise, I would not throw it out and just use it, and just realize that when you have to throw it out, it's hazardous waste. So definitely don't put anything that you suspect of containing PFAS for recycling unless it can handle it. Like, for instance, like a Teflon pan, I would still put that in the metal recycling because the Teflon would probably get incinerated when they do the iron. So you just have to keep in mind what's the best way to dispose of it when it reached its end of its life. That's my advice.
And I think this is important to point out that, I mean, the reason why we or Chemsec are working with this is that it's very difficult to put that pressure and that responsibility on the consumer, because they are not. It's difficult for us to know what to do with these things and how to handle it, and we should have regulation making sure that we don't have to make all of these sort of very informed choices and take the responsibility all the time as consumers. So I think it's important to understand why we're trying to do something and what we want to achieve.
And those are very good words to end on for a clean, green, and easy circular economy. And with that, our time is up. And I just want to say thank you so much again, Jonatan and Anna, for a great presentation and webinar and all the great services Chemsec provides. And thank you also for a very nice discussion. And that's all from us, from Sarah Hale and me, Hans-Peter Arp from ZeroPM. And we'll see you at the next webinar. Please check out zeropm.eu for more information.
ZeroPM, Zero Pollution of Persistent and Mobile Substances. This project has received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme under Grant Agreement number 101036756.